Thank you very much. I think for that analysis, and I want to thank Malebo and Patrick for their contribution, because look, the view is that generally we would all agree that every person that comes into the country must be documented for various reasons, like service delivery, and that approach that is coming from Malebo, I mean, brings a fresh breath of dealing with it. But the biggest challenge that I think we're having is that we've got a lot of people now riding on this issue of illegality, and then whilst they come out there and stand as if they're dealing with the undocumentation, they just then check all the migrants under the same umbrella. They're attacking people. They're saying they want people in the spaza shop industry, for example, to be they shouldn't be migrants there. But when they talk about that, they forget that we've got asylum seekers, who are people that now, in terms of our law, because we've domesticated, I mean, the Convention on Refugees and Asylum Seekers, that are entitled to do that as a result. So, those are issues that are a big concern, and mainly the fact that we've got people that appear to be well funded. And this is where the challenge is, because you will not have people moving from KZN, driving cars. I mean, we saw Ngizwe, for example, recently being given, one of the most expensive bakkies, and by some unknown, business people. So there is, a likelihood. For example, if we look at from 2019, when we had a serious, fallout in Johannesburg, the GP area, where we've got a lot of shops that sell not only to South Africa, but to actually a lot of SADC, countries. And we had a serious attack in that particular area. And we were told that that economy runs into billions. And, by, a well, renowned, professor who was visiting from the US. Now, because they'd carried out research. So what we then realized, that it would appear that there is big business also that is involved, which realized that their economy is shrinking because of this particular niche, that people are finding, in the small business that is providing to them. Because, Johannesburg, particularly, Johannesburg CBD, if I'm to pay particular focus to that, was seen as an area that had become, a white elephant that was, deteriorating, and Sandton and Rosebank were all coming up. But all of a sudden, thanks to the small business that are run by migrants selling clothes and small wares and all that, it became more vibrant, attracting more people, attracting international, traders and buyers, and people that come from even, provincial areas like KZN, the Free State Northern Province coming to buy, and not going to buy from Sandton. So that has created a big challenge. And unfortunately, because maybe we have not had a serious investigation into who is behind this anti-migrant, rhetoric and causing these attacks. So we will have people that therefore appear to be funded. We had, for example, in Operation Dudula, that there was a fight, a fiasco about money, and the leader was stepping down, and one wonders where that money is coming from, who's funding that. So maybe if the government is serious about stamping out this, which is going to portray South Africa as a hub of xenophobia and hatred to African migrants, there needs to be a serious investigation into who is bankrolling these activities, because they all come out in the name of illegal immigration, but when they do their attacks, they attack every migrant under in that way.
Malebo, I know you are wearing two hats as a member of parliament and also an international relations specialist. And I think just bearing in mind that you are wearing both hats and looking at the anti-migrant protests that are taking place in the country, and looking at South Africa and how South Africa is actually seen across the African continent, because we see that most of those that are on the receiving end are people of African origin. We've seen Ghana raise concerns. We've seen statements come out of Nigeria. We've seen the Mozambican leader, in direct contact with President Cyril Ramaphosa as well. And South Africa now being seen somewhat of a pariah state as well. And again, I want to make the statement that I made earlier in terms of, have we become xenophobic bullies? Now, just looking at it from a leadership perspective and also an international relations perspective, what does this actually mean for this country?
Well, firstly, South Africa has always been seen as a big brother of Africa. Because we have the most, economic strength and military prowess, which most of we are high up in terms of the index to most of the other African countries, and we've been expected to show leadership, and I think this is precisely why South Africa has become the number one place where every other African country that has issues, they spill over into South Africa. Because we have taken on the noble responsibility when we started becoming, when we stopped becoming a pariah state in 1994, we took an international stance that we are going to, extend a humanitarian hand to and play a significant role, especially in terms of peacekeeping in Africa in various regions from Burundi to Cote d'Ivoire, and actually played a big brother role in most of the conflicts throughout the continent. And I think this is why we are the number one place where people find refuge. And when people are seeking asylum, they're finding South Africa. My only issue is in every state today, when you look, we don't have more than five places where there's political instability and war. And African countries need to be very honest with themselves to say the economic instability that they have within their countries, because mostly we don't have a lot of wars, say for a few countries, including the DRC, where there's relative political instability. Every other country in Africa has political stability, and there is some sort of economic activity that they have. Why is it that then they allow their citizens, they allow their states to deteriorate to such a point that every single citizen finds refuge in South Africa? And we have in South Africa adopted a 3-state policy to say that for asylum seekers, look at the first 3 states around you. And if you don't find safety in those states, then you can come to South Africa. But people from Morocco, from Tunisia, from Algeria, from all the way from the top of Africa to the east, to the west, Chad, DRC, Ghana, Nigeria, Burundi, they all can't find refuge in South Africa. Now, if we are expected to house 53 of the states because they are unable to really cater to their own communities, what will then happen to South Africa? And that is a genuine question that our dearest doctor should ask himself. Now, he's also mentioned a fact to say that, the migrants are creating, there's some vibrancy and economic activity that they are bringing to Johannesburg. But can I tell you, as our presenter, that this economy is illegal? This is where illicit trade trumps our formal economy. South Africa's economy right now, as it stands, the formal economy is limping at about 1%. At about 1% annually. But I can tell you that the illicit economy, it ranks about 6% growth every single year, which means with that bulk of that 6%, we can actually absorb the 12 million unemployed South Africans. But all these people are operating outside the framework of a legal financing system. They're not documented. They're not with SARS. So all these businesses that you are seeing in the CBD that are creating a vibrancy, they are robbing South Africa of the opportunity of having a large tax base that will allow us to plow back into our social infrastructure and our economic infrastructure that can then house the multitudes of people who are coming to South Africa. So that is my issue, that all the people who are in South Africa depend on the government for the social and economic services, but they are unable to plow back into it because they are operating in the shadows. Let them come in, documented, have their businesses registered, because this is genuine revenue generation that we are getting as a state. However, all of that money goes in and out, and it flows through informal systems that rob South Africans of a real opportunity of using that large tax base to cushion us as a country. I don't think there's any self-respecting country that would allow its systems to be exploited in the manner that South Africa has been, and it continues to keep quiet. There's a real opportunity to turn the conversation around if we stop maybe concentrating on what Ngizwe did or a certain group, to say, if our people are then encouraged as fellow African countries, if our people are encouraged to enter into South Africa legally, to say, how do we relax then our regulations towards them participating within our economy? How do we then encourage them to participate into the formal structures so that there is a benefit to the South African economy in them being there at the country? But at the current moment, we are servicing everyone and not getting anything back, and that is unsustainable.
Patrick, I just like your comment in terms of what Malebo has said, and obviously questioning the whole issue about legality and the informal trading. But again, here is a question in terms of, whose responsibility is this? Who is accountable? I mean, is there a lack of governance? Is there a lack of enforcement that people are allowed to operate illegally? And, this is where these questions are being raised, that, in terms of the government, obviously has opened the borders. We spoke earlier on about the lack of control in terms of border management. But once they get into the country as well, again, it's a question of managing the migrants. It's a question of enforcing, that they are legal. But it appears as if we don't have the capacity to actually deal with the problem, because it is the elephant in the room and it is a huge problem.
Yeah, I think it does seem apparent that we don't have the capacity to manage, what the regulations are. And I mean, if you look at it, really what we do need is genuine law enforcement. And before you have law enforcement, what you need is clarity on what the rules of the game are. And when I talk about rules of the game, what are the rules of the game that are basically, what are they? Are they reasonable? Are they fair and reasonable rules? The second thing is that if you've got fair and reasonable rules, does everyone know about them? And thirdly, are the rules consistently applied? And are the rules, where they are breached, where there are breaches of the law, are they enforced? It's only when you have a holistic system, like any other application of societal management, where you have clear rules of the game that people know about, are fair and reasonable and predictable, so that when people are coming through the borders, they're coming, from Burundi or from wherever into this country, they must know if they come here, they've got to play by the rules of the game of South Africa. And so once you've got that system in place, and there are many rules already, as long as there are no rules, there are lots of rules already, it's a question of having a coordinated approach, and one that is objective and decisively implemented, that people know that if you break a rule in any societal management situation, there are going to be consequences and there's going to be accountability. In the case of coming over the border undocumented, and if you're discovered and not documented, you know what the consequences will be. You'll be thrown out of the country. If you come into the country and you are running an illegal spa, whatever, then you'll be identified and held accountable. And if Dr. Vusi is talking about, which I'm not too familiar with, there's an underground mafia system operating below in the dark, making money out of this whole system and exploiting it, then certainly they, like any syndicate, like any mafia, must be rooted out and identified firmly and consistently, so that everyone knows that they can't flourish, other ones can't arise. So it's got to do with positive attitudinal management of it. But also there needs to be attitudinal changes, that leadership must send consistent messages about attitudes towards migration, that it is a fact of life, we just got to accept it. But there are rules of the game, and there are rules to manage it, so that people's propensity to scapegoat vulnerable people because they're undocumented, knowing that they are vulnerable and exploiting their situation, is not something that will be tolerated. And so that is and the other thing too, which Malebo was talking about as well, is that there's a bit of an irony operating here, because in the struggle against apartheid, South Africa looked to the greater African diaspora for assistance and help to overcome it. And now they're finding all of their, like recently we've seen people from Ghana, from Zambia and Nigeria coming into the country and now being told that they're not welcome. There's a bit of a contradiction going on there. So South Africa's losing its credibility in its standing in the eyes of the overall African continent. And I think that needs to be, those messages need to be dealt with. We've got Ghana, calling the ambassador of South Africa. We've got the Nigerians complaining about what happens to Nigerians and so on. And those messages are damaging seriously South Africa's diplomatic reputation. Well, we can start in messaging in relation to that, but start closer to home in the SADC countries around us to get a common understanding of our regional cooperation about how to manage cross-border inflows and so on. And just lastly, it's just insofar as regulations are concerned, is the media, the formal media, managing the messages about how this problem is dealt with, and also particularly not to over-exaggerate and dramatize it, for newsworthiness, to be measured in the manner in which they deal with the problem. And also social media, of course, social media platforms. I mean, it's a fertile ground for xenophobia, anti-immigrant messaging and so on. People just instantly just give their message out, and it has a snowballing compound effect and starts to change people's thinking individually and collectively far too quickly and dangerously, quite frankly. And that needs to be, I think, looked at very, very carefully.
Thank you, Patrick. Dr. Vusi, we always know that the buck stops right at the top. And I think just listening to what Patrick is saying as well in terms of enforcement, but again, looking at the expectation, look at the socio-economic situation that prevails in the country at this point in time, where millions are reliant on social grants, the state of joblessness, homelessness again. And again, it's a problem that starts right from the top. And one cannot hide behind the fact that the reason why many people, whether we're talking about Operation Diaspora or March to March movement as well, complaining about jobs or the lack of jobs or poverty, whatever it is, the problem obviously stems in terms of where this government has actually taken this country and brought this country economically to its knees. And I think that is an issue, a fundamental issue that needs to be addressed, where one looks at the anti-migration protests, soft targets, but the real problem obviously lies where we've seen this country economically gone down to levels that we never ever dreamt of before. And when you talk about, something sinister or a sinister movement behind, I see Dr. Vusi obviously has, I think he's having a bit of a problem, but perhaps Malebo, you can look at this as well, where when Dr. Vusi speaks about a sinister movement, why is the anger not directed against black monopoly capital or white monopoly capital? Why is it the spaza shop owner who is just seeking a living in this country?
Thank you very much again. Pardon me, my battery was about to go off. So that's a very legitimate question. It's a very legitimate question, but it's because